This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the all-in-one website platform for entrepreneurs to stand out and succeed online. So every January, I start to think about books in a rather specific way. I know I talk about and think about books basically all the time, but in January, it's rather specific. And I don't think about them in terms of what I specifically want to read or what I need to read in the year, but rather I think about the kind of reader that I want and need to be for the year ahead of me. I think the reason January sticks out in my brain is because with all these, New Year resolutions, January turns books into rather a self-surveillance time of year. We talk a lot about our reading goals, whether we met them or whether we underperformed in them, and then we feel a lot of shame around that, or our TBR piles, our to be read piles, and the shame around what we have and have not read, the I should have read this last year. And when it comes to January and we're looking back on what we're going to do and what we want to do and our stats and things like that, reading becomes another arena of self-judgment. I found over the years that academia specifically, but also back in the day booktube and productivity culture distorted my idea of reading. And with that distortion came the idea that not reading is a personal and moral failure. Like I've underachieved and I've actually become less of a human. Which isn't great when, if you're like me, reading is basically your only identity. I don't have any identity outside of books. And I think I talked about this rather extensively through the past few years, talking about how my burnout has hurt me both physically and mentally and manifested itself in illnesses, but most specifically it manifested in my inability to read very well. And I say that knowing that I did read 41 books last year, but that's nothing compared to what I used to. And even then I didn't really enjoy my experience of reading. I've talked in great more detail about the extent of how badly reading manifested in me, in many physical ailments and things like that. But for the lighter version, basically it made me incredibly unwell when I was reading, and I was experiencing physical symptoms of that illness whenever I was around books, which isn't great when obviously your PhD relies on you reading, and also so does your work online. But over the years when I stopped being able to read as I used to be able to read, I found that I felt like I was losing myself to the point that I just felt like I didn't exist anymore, because the only thing I've ever, in my living memory, not from my teenagehood, from the past 2 decades, what I've identified with is literature and reading and my relationship with books. And outside of that, I don't really have any sense of self, which I'm not entirely sure is healthy, but it's just how my brain works. I feel less of myself when I haven't been connecting with literature. And what's funny is I think a lot of it is because I've extended my people-pleasing tendencies into the literary world, which I didn't think was possible, but apparently it is. I noticed that when I started getting ill and stopped being able to read and had all this pressure about, you have to read the right thing and you have to read productively and you can't waste time because there's a deadline and you have to hit this deadline and produce this content and write this many words, so you can't waste your time reading for fun and you can't waste your time reading the wrong thing. That kind of intense pressure really broke my brain. And then on top of that, obviously I was hyper aware of I had to read correctly and rather than what I was interested in. And reading correctly stemmed from anything from where I had to read in academia. If I was interested in something but other people didn't see a future in that field of research, then I had to stop reading that thing I was interested in and pivot to another area which may be more conducive or more prone to success, or there may be rabbit holes that I was told to stay away from because they are not relevant or they're not academic enough. And then similarly online, when I'm reading, I was reading to make sure that I was reading for something that would be algorithmically friendly or what would appeal to the audience. And no wonder my sense of self was lost entirely, because I was completely morphing myself like goo in between these avenues and forcing myself to read about things and not necessarily I was not interested in, but also it wasn't my first choice, and it never was my first choice, and for years and years it just stopped. I never had a first choice, and any kind of reading outside of what was algorithmically friendly or what was pertinent to my PhD and what others expected me to write about just made me really ill. I couldn't even touch it because the guilt was so intense. And yeah, no wonder I lost myself. No wonder I felt like I haven't been myself for a long, long time. And obviously it kind of manifested in me needing to leave my PhD for a while because I wasn't doing well and I wasn't entirely sure what I was doing any of it for, because none of it felt like it was for me anymore. And that's sad. But before we get any further into talking about reading, I like to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, which is Squarespace. So whether you're just starting out or managing a growing brand, Squarespace makes it easy to create beautiful websites, engage with your audience, and sell anything from products to content to time, all in one place and all on your terms. I've gone through many iterations online, from starting as a book blogger, believe it or not, to running my own business, and Squarespace has seen all sides of my online evolution. As a content creator, I can make my own workshops or courses on my Squarespace website because I can host them there, as it allows me to create members-only content for my community, so I can sell access to online courses or blogs or videos and memberships, and purchases can be anything from a one-time fee to a subscription access. And then when it comes to evolving my business, I can make smarter business decisions with Squarespace's intuitive built-in analytics tools, which allows me to review my website traffic or learn where to focus my engagement, track revenue from bookings and invoicing product sales, all in one place. So if you're interested to start your new business or revamp your business in this new year, go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and then when you are ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Lady of the Library to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. And I suppose this got me thinking about the different types of reading that exist and why we suddenly confuse them. There's nourishment reading, which is comfort reads and rereads and reading that makes you feel safe and grounded. Then you have friction reading, so this is more challenging and demanding and slow, and obviously a lot of my work demands a lot of friction reading, which is quite tiresome. But then you have identity reading, the books that you read because you want to be seen as someone who has read this book, and not in a pretentious or superficial way, but you know that there's a book out there that may speak to you directly, or you want to learn more about this. This is part of your identity. If you want to know more about Egyptology, you probably want to read books about Egyptology, and that's part of your identity. It's not for anything else, it's because it's fulfilling a need within you. And then obviously then you have work reading. For us, it's all different. For me, there's certain things I have to read online, maybe that's what's trending, or what other people are talking about, or what I think will do well as a video, or then also PhD research, which is research and extraction. And again, that's quite tiresome. It's not exactly fulfilling in a nourishing way, which is why when you only read friction reading and work reading, which is what I've done, rather than any identity reading or nourishment reading, no wonder I feel burned out. And I think without me distinguishing these types of reading, I was treating all reading as if it should do the same emotional and moral job for me. And that's where, whilst I was seeing other people and meeting their needs, I wasn't seeing myself. I think it's been a long time since I've actually regarded books as my companions rather than tasks to be done, monuments to be challenged and get over with, seen as a to-do list. I should have read this scholar by now, I should have read this text by now. I saw them as like conquering them and getting my work done as fast and productively as possible, but I never let books be seasonal. And that's not me saying you have to read according to the seasons in terms of like spring and summer and autumn, but knowing that my reading patterns need to be seasonal, or else I'll just burn out. If I'm only doing friction and work reading constantly, I have to have seasons where I read nourishing book or I read identity books and know that I'm doing it for that purpose. And I have to almost like plan out my year in terms of seasons and what I should make sure that I'm reading, so I'm not going to burn myself out by only reading a certain type of book all of the time. It's almost like seeing my reading future as having texture rather than as a to-do list constantly. So what kind of reader do I personally want to become in this year? It's going to be a very intense year for me in terms of my workload and my research levels. And I feel like I need to stop people pleasing and start reading for myself and feel confident enough to research that I want to read about this thing and that there's value in my decisions to make something work, even if other people are a little bit skeptical. Always take advice, because obviously people know better than I do, but still explore what I'm curious about and find out the hard way if it was relevant or not. I also have to be someone who is such a willing rereader. I've always had a lot of shame about rereading, particularly if I think because of my dyslexia, there is a lot of shame in rereading, not just from the beginning of a book, but like rereading a passage or rereading a sentence because I don't read it correctly a lot of the time. And because I'm a slow reader as a dyslexic, rereading has got a lot of shame. So I know I used to get jealous of people who say like, oh, I love rereading my favourite books. I was like, there's so much shame tied into that, because it, to me, rereading symbolises that I didn't get it the first time and it makes me feel stupid. So I need to be someone who embraces rereading and know that I reread differently from other people, but I'm also allowed to reread without any shame because rereading is part of the journey. Like I said, and I believe in a podcast for my Patreons, you don't visit a country once and say that you know the country, and it's the same with books. You don't visit the book once and say that you know that book. You have to keep travelling it and seeing it from different angles all the time, seeing it different mindsets. Similarly, I'm going to see value in my unfinished books. I think there is a lot of meaning in the unfinished books, the ones that I choose not to finish. That has value as well. Again, a lot of shame is done with, I didn't get to the end, even though I wasn't enjoying it, I thought it was awful. Because a lot of times I finish a book I don't enjoy, I just tend to get quite angry, and I have lots of ranting to my partner, who's just like, why? Because my partner also is someone who always will finish, and he looks at me quite shocked whenever I put one down, and that makes me feel ashamed that I put it down. So I then persevere when I know now, and long enough in my mid-30s, that I'm allowed to not like a book and push it away. It doesn't make me less of a reader or less intelligent or less capable. It's just that I know my taste, and there are a lot of the books in the world. I think this is also the year that I want to start thinking with books a lot more intentionally. I feel like, again, because I've been so much in a productivity mindset for the past few years in terms of my research and also my work here on YouTube, I think through them, not with them. I see them as something that I'm other than, and that I'm trying to prove myself worthy of, or prove myself able to collate it, rather than thinking, oh, I'm part of this narrative too. Like, how my brain works is part of the narrative. I'm not here to be an educator. I'm not an expert. I just want to talk about how I interpret these texts and be very hyper aware that I'm not talking from an authorial point of view, but I've done research and this is what I found, and that's from my research. That's fun. It's not about me teaching people how to think about a text or how to think about something, but it's the journey that I had with this text and what I've come through my research. So I need to be part of the discussion when it comes to books, rather than me hear books here in this kind of very solemn, serious line between us. I'm not sure if that makes any sense. In my head it does. So rather than having reading goals, I've given myself reading questions that I'm starting the year with, and I want to share them with you in case you wanted to use any of them. The first one is, what kind of thinking do I need to do this year? Are you thinking in terms of your curiosities, like history, or are you thinking in terms of like advancing yourself in a skill you'd like to read more about, like graphic design? The other thing I've asked myself is, do I need refuge or do I need resistance? I think I've done my years of refuge, quite honestly. I think I need a little bit more resistance, even though it sounds like I should be keeping it a little bit lower. I listened to a podcast recently that talked about motivation in terms of how a lot of people wish they had motivation, and those same people who say, oh, I wish I was motivated to do that, it would be so easy if I was just motivated to do that, and those people are usually always procrastinators. And the reason there's that disconnect there is that actually they want the same feeling with motivation that they feel with procrastination, which is that it's easy. They want something to feel easy, but the outputs to be different. They want to still feel like they're having a nice, relaxing time, as like procrastination, but motivation. But instead of being procrastinators, they want to be someone who produces work. And reality is that it's not going to be easy. It has to have resistance. In order to be productive, there has to be that discomfort. And when people are looking for motivation, they wish they just had it easy, so they could just get up in the morning and go on with this and be really motivated to do it, because they want that sense of ease rather than a sense of challenge. And I could see myself in that. I was like, yeah, I've always thought, I wish it was easy like it used to be for me. I don't think it was easy for me back then. I think I've deluded myself of how easy it was. I think initially it was hard and it became easy. A bit like push-ups in a gym, you know, the first time you ever do a pull-up, say, or a push-up, and you've never done one before, it's really hard, but you have to keep working at it. And then over a year's time, 1 pull-up or 10 push-ups is really easy than when you started. But it wasn't easy at the beginning. You had to get there. Action precedes motivation. Another question I'm asking myself is, do I want to read outwards or inwards? I'm personally reading, I think it would be a combination of both, but really primarily outwards. I want to be someone who is learning and bringing this information together with me and moving forward. I think I've done enough inward reflection over the past year. And the final question I've asked myself is, which books make me feel human, not more impressive? because again, I think a lot of people read to have said they read certain things, and I've had the opposite. I'm scared to read certain books because I'm scared people will say, well, you weren't clever enough to have got that, or did you really read it? Which is something I've experienced a lot over my years. So I've always been scared to read books that have cult followings, like Tolstoy books or Dostoevsky. I'm scared to read those texts because there's a lot of, I hate to be generic with this statement, but there are a lot of chaps out there who really love those books, and you kind of feel like you're entering a bro world, almost like a frat house, when you talk about those texts, which make you not want to go in there because you feel like you're going to be picked apart and seen if you really read it or not. It's very similar in the classics world, though not as intense, thank goodness, but it is very similar in the classics world when people are trying to suss you out to see if you've actually read there or if you snuck in. And there's a wee bit of like, if I just say I haven't read it, no one will question me on it, which is why I always say I don't speak any other languages. When I do, I can read Latin and I do read French, but I don't tell people that because I'm scared people will then start testing me on it. And I think I've come from a history of trying to be tested on and picked apart to see how smart I actually am, or if I'm actually faking it or not. I'm not here to read to be perceived by other people, which is how I got into the Jean-Paul Sartre No Exit a few months ago, and did a video on that because I realised that I was terrified of being perceived, which is why I stayed away from a lot of things, and I self-sabotage because I'm scared that if I actually do succeed, people will have high expectations of me and I can't meet them, and they either wait for me to fail, and that's easier to deal with than me actually be successful, because then people will have higher expectations and try and quiz me on it, and it's better to just be out of frame and not care about things. It's amazing how much books literally dictate how I am in the world, and literature and education. It's quite wild. But really, I haven't got a reading plan for this year. I think I'm really making a way to forgive myself in advance. I don't owe my books productivity, and they don't owe me output, and I'm allowed to read quietly without being monitored or being quizzed on it, and without actually having to discuss everything that I've read. But I would like to go back to reading for fun and reading quietly and documenting everything I read, manually in my wee little book, and having comments on it, and maybe being inspired in a more organic and less pressurized way, not trying to tailor myself to meet people's expectations or algorithmic expectations. So with all that said, how are you thinking about books this year? Not what you're going to read, but how you are thinking about them. I'd love to know, so let me know in your comments down below. Thank you as always for watching, and thank you to my patrons for all of your support and making this channel possible. I really appreciate it. If you did like this video, please consider liking it and subscribing, and thank you to my librarians over on Patreon. I have Silver Changeling, Lacey Grindstaff, Joshua Heredia, Gil the Gilded Dragon, Lady of the Labyrinth, Ellen, Wee Lauren, Yvonne and Yvonne, Jenny Edivane, Marina, Nicholas Reed and Andy Bazil. Thank you ever so much as always, and I hope you are happy and healthy, and remember, books save lives, so keep reading.